It wasn't one cataclysmic event, but a series of cascading failures that sparked rebellion. For centuries, the cracks in the Imperium's foundation had deepened. Corruption among the elites, crushing military defeats, and scandal after scandal of the ruling High Lords finally gave way to civil unrest. Military failure was the first crack. Decades of campaigns bled the Astra Militarum dry. The Tyranids pushed further into Imperial space, tearing through entire subsectors with each incursion. The Chaos warbands, emboldened by the fracturing power of the Eye of Terror, took Cadia, and the Imperial Navy's repeated attempts to retake it ended it in humiliating defeat. Then came the invasion of Armageddon by Orcs, who shattered the planet's defenses for the third time. Each failure was a glaring reminder of how the Imperium could no longer protect its people. Billions of guardsmen were sacrificed in futile campaigns, thrown into the meat grinder with little strategy or hope of victory. The tipping point came with a series of scandals that rocked Terra itself. The High Lords of Terra, once thought of as untouchable in their divine mandate, were exposed for hoarding wealth, siphoning resources meant for war efforts, and indulging in grotesque excesses while Imperial worlds burned. It was revealed that during the darkest days of the Tyranid War, several High Lords funneled war funds into private estates and off-world pleasure colonies. Entire star systems were left defenseless, their resources sold off for personal gain. The corruption spread far beyond Terra. Planetary governors hoarded tithes, starving Imperial worlds to enrich themselves. The ecclesiarchy, the religious backbone of the Imperium, faced its own crisis. It was revealed that high-ranking cardinals were involved in selling relics of the Emperor to rogue traders and wealthy nobles, fueling heretical movements across the Imperium. Inquisitors investigating these cases were mysteriously silenced, or worse, disappeared. Faith in the God Emperor's appointed clergy began to waver. As these failures mounted, uprisings and riots spread like wildfire. The people of the Imperium, starved, brutalized, and abandoned, began to rise up. Hive cities became battlegrounds as workers and civilians, emboldened by dissident voices, demanded reform. Entire planetary defense forces mutinied, siding with revolutionary leaders who promised a new order, free from the yoke of Terra's corrupt elite. The collapse of the Imperium came swiftly once it began. The Galactic Reformation, as it came to be known, started with dissidents from within the Astra Militarum, backed by rogue factions of the Mechanicus and certain Space Marine chapters, who had grown disillusioned with the endless wars and the inefficiency of the High Lords. It began on Terra itself. Spearheaded by revolutionary leaders from the Adeptus Mechanicus, militant reformers stormed the Imperial Palace's lower levels, demanding accountability from the High Lords. They were joined by thousands of guardsmen, hive gangers, and even low-ranking members of the Adeptus Administratum who had grown tired of serving a bloated bureaucracy. The rebellion spread like wildfire to the rest of the Imperium. Entire planets declared independence from Terra, throwing off the yoke of imperial tithes and servitude. Meanwhile, the Adeptus Astartes, divided in their loyalties, were pushed into internal strife. Chapters such as the Ultramarines, always more independent-minded, sided with the reformers, believing that the Emperor's vision was never meant to be a stagnant dictatorship. Others, like the Imperial Fists, saw any threat to the Imperium's unity as heresy and moved to crush the rebellion. This split among the Space Marines only worsened the chaos, leading to entire wars between chapters. The ecclesiarchy called it heresy, but their cries fell on deaf ears. The power of the faith crumbled in the wake of public revelations about its leadership's corruption. The people no longer trusted the words of priests who had sold out the Emperor's name for their own gain. In the ashes of the Imperium rose the Galactic Federation of Man, a fractured but democratically structured government born out of the old Imperium's failures. No longer ruled by a central figurehead on Terra, the new Federation operated as a confederation of semi-independent planets, each with its own voice in the newly established Galactic Senate. However, democracy came with its own set of problems. Planets that had been loyal to Terra for millennia now had to negotiate for resources and protection. The once cohesive military of the Astra Militarum was fractured, as planetary governors now held power over their own defense forces. The Federation found itself facing an immediate crisis: how to protect humanity when unity was no longer guaranteed. While many welcomed the newfound freedom from Terra's oppressive tithes and control, others found themselves vulnerable. Border worlds, long reliant on the Imperium's might, were now exposed to the predations of the galaxy's endless threats. The collapse of the Imperium did not go unnoticed. The galaxy's other factions, ever watchful for signs of weakness, seized upon the opportunity. The Tyranids, sensing the disunity among humanity, pressed their advantage, tearing through border worlds with renewed ferocity. Planetary defense forces, now fragmented and poorly coordinated, struggled to mount a unified response. Entire sectors were lost as the hive fleets descended on unprotected worlds. The Orcs, ever eager for a good fight, took advantage of the disarray. Warlord Gazkul Thraka, seeing the weakening of human resistance, launched a massive Wah into the heart of the Federation's space. Without the unified command of the Imperial Navy, the Federation struggled to contain the Orc horde. While individual worlds held their ground, others were overrun, their inhabitants enslaved or slaughtered for sport. The Eldar, ever calculating, saw the disintegration of the Imperium as a chance to manipulate humanity to their own ends. The craft worlds used the chaos to retake lost territories and establish new alliances with emerging human factions, all while keeping their own objectives hidden. Some Eldar warbands openly fought for newly independent human worlds, seeing this as a means to weaken Chaos and the other great powers. The Tau Empire, who had long sought to expand their sphere of influence, saw the fragmentation of the Imperium as an invitation. Tau diplomats offered protection and technological aid to border worlds, drawing many of them into the greater good. Entire human planets, left isolated by the collapse of the Imperium, turned to the Tau for salvation, effectively joining the growing Tau Empire. But it was Chaos that proved to be the greatest threat to the new Federation. With the Imperium shattered, the forces of Chaos moved quickly to capitalize on the turmoil. The Black Legion, led by Abaddon the Despoiler, launched fresh Black Crusades into the core worlds, where Loyalist forces were still fighting over what remained of Imperial authority. Traitor Astartes and demonic legions swept through weakened sectors, pushing deeper into formerly protected space. For the Necrons, the fall of the Imperium was an opportunity for reclamation. Tomb worlds, long dormant or only partially awakened, launched coordinated strikes to reclaim their ancient dominions. Exploiting the weakness of disjointed human defenses, Necron overlords sought to rebuild their star empires, striking at vital industrial and manufacturing hubs of the newly formed Federation. In the shadows, the Genestealer cults capitalized on the instability, spreading their influence further into Federation space. With the central authority of the Imperium broken, they embedded themselves in isolated systems, slowly turning populations against the new Federation government. Though it had rid itself of the Imperium's brutal autocracy, The Galactic Federation was far from a perfect solution. The once centralized control of Terra had been replaced with endless debate and bureaucracy. Representatives bickered over resources, planetary rights, and military strategies, often too slow to respond to external threats. The military, once a cohesive force, had become an assembly of planetary militias, less capable of uniting against a galaxy of enemies. As the galaxy continued to burn, many questioned whether the old Imperium, for all its tyranny, had at least kept the enemies of man at bay. In the ashes of an empire, a new kind of tyranny began to rise. The tyranny of indecision, of fractured rule, and of endless compromise.